Season 9 episode 2 of Rick and Morty just came out, and after the masterpiece that was season 9's premiere, it's hard to compete with that, but I think this episode was extremely good too. The episode is titled Rick Days, 7 Nights, which is a reference to the 1998 film 6 Days, 7 Nights. The movie has some minor but definitely present parallels to the Rick and Morty episode, including some of the names being reused, but that's pretty normal for the show. Anyways, Rick Days 7 Nights opens with an RV camper that is almost exactly an RV version of Jerry's car, driving through some heavy snow. And while driving, they lose control of the car not trying to hit a deer, and they have a small crash. If it's Jerry driving, I'm pretty sure he got some flashbacks. Anyways, the mysterious driver gets out of the car and sees that they've got a flat. So they pull out a radio and get to work, sawing down tree branches, melting down his boots in a fire, and powering up an engine with his car's gas. He uses the melted down boot to patch up the tire and reflates it. At this point, it looks like it has to be Jerry because this is such a Jerry activity. But after cleaning up his gear, the man reveals himself to be Rick. Wow, that was very surprising to me at first. But as the episode goes on, it makes a lot more sense. The same deer from before runs at the sight of Rick's actual face, and Rick heads back in the car, driving up to a bowling alley named Dream Lane. When I saw this, I immediately thought the episode was going to be some sort of dream or something, but the name was more so foreshadowing other things. Rick enters the alley, and we get introduced to the new gang: Antonio, Bowser, Little Mike, Mike, and Margarine. Well, of course, and Rick, but not what you'd expect, because Rick is now simply going as Ted. Bowling alley itself is very comforting, with pictures on the wall of the whole group drinking in their bowling outfits, Rick and Antonio celebrating a big win, and other photos without Rick, including Margarine and her mom on the opening of the bowling alley. After the intro, Ted and the gang talk about Ted's occupation, which turns out to be PVC piping. After having a good laugh, they all head their separate ways except Rick, who takes a ride with Antonio to grab a six-pack. When he gets in the car, Rick says an incredibly deep but simple line after hearing that Margarine keeps the lane open after her mom passed away.
Everybody's running from something.
Rick then visits a liquor store with even more of a generic name than the bowling alley. This time it's literally named Country Store. When Rick goes to pay for the beer, however, the store gets robbed. The robber tries to shoot Rick, but that's when the tech takes over and decapacitates the robber. Rick is extremely stunned by what happened, and he runs off with the beer, not looking back. Back at his RV, he goes experimenting, and his tech starts to work on him, revealing a hologram Rick that says to him that his brain has been wiped, and every year Rick takes an adventure like this to go on vacation for 2 weeks. After briefing himself on his true identity, he gives himself a choice to either go back to being Rick or remove the memory and enjoy his trip as Ted. Instead of picking either of the two options, Rick is incredibly distraught from the whole thing, and like he said earlier, he runs away. Margarine lets him back inside the bowling alley where they have a talk about whether she knows him or not. She shows him a new disco ball that she installed, and they enjoy each other's company. However, maybe they enjoy the company a little too much. Rick isn't able to sleep after all that he discovered today, so he hops out of bed and goes straight back to the RV. More holograms attack him, but just like what Morty did when holograms of Rick came after him, he ignored them, and Rick destroys the RV. Rick heads over to a frozen lake to go fishing and drink with the boys. Rick, or Teddy, whatever you want to call him by this point, tells his friends that he is thinking about staying this year. He tells them about how this is the only place he feels real, and it's like his existence outside of this place is entirely made up, which of course we all know is the opposite of how things really are. The group all goes to sleep, but again Rick can't, and he's woken up by a mysterious light, so he goes to investigate, and it turns out to be an egg of all things. Just then, Rick hears a noise and discovers his leg has a hidden phone. It turns out to be Morty calling him, but Rick, who is still Ted, is thrown for a loop by everything that's happening to bring him back home. As the egg viciously attacks Rick and tries to grab him, Morty begs Rick to hang up the leg phone, but his new friends end up being the ones to save him from this device. They head back to the bowling alley to explain a plan to Margarine, a plan that unfortunately meant Janice and Mary couldn't finish their game. Rick says goodbye to Margarine, and he makes her promise that she's not going to come back, and she has him promise that he's not going to die in her bowling alley. The whole gang works together to try to stop whatever's happening to their friend Ted. Rick and Mike disable Rick's arm tech, Little Mike and Bowser make bowling ball weapons, and Antonio installs a sprinkler system to disarm any bots that may come their way. Oh, and it's a Rick and Morty episode. so you know they're coming their way. After everything is set up, they get into position and defend themselves with their new weapons from a horde of robots coming to restore Ted back to being Rick. Unfortunately for them, even with all the handmade tech, the robots look like they're way too much, all until Margarine shows up to give them a hand, and just like that, the whole gang takes down the robot army, but while doing so, they kinda destroy the whole alley. But an even bigger cost than the bowling alley itself was the fact that Margarine was a casualty due to the destruction of the robots. Rick says his final goodbye, and by now he's had enough, so he grabs one of the robots with his main goal being revenge. Rick starts to utilize his maximum technology and gets the hang of some more of his tech. He tells his friends to leave, but they insist to help him bring down his non-vacation self. Using a vintage machine, Ted tracks down real Rick's home planet, and using leftover tech and his unmatched IQ, Rick works with all of his friends to make an entire spaceship in basically one afternoon's work. Some of his friends start to question their safety, but Antonio trusts Rick to bring them back home, and then so do the rest of them. As they launch into space and try to escape their planet's gravity, the ship starts to cave in on itself, but they do it and get a beautiful view from space. Right before Rick takes them about as fast as you could ever go, and for the second episode in a row, Rick has a big landing in the garage. Rick's new supportive cast of friends help him take and disarm the tech from within the garage, but it causes the rest of the family's attention. Big Mike takes Beth hostage, but she seems unfazed by the whole thing. Next, Summer overrides the garage, then Morty shows up and the rest of the family, completely used to Rick's shenanigans, leave like nothing ever happened. Ted, Rick, and Morty start to get acquainted with one another, and Ted Rick starts to use all the tools in real Rick's garage to his advantage, and his friends start to use him for it. In the next scene, they visit an Earth bowling alley where, using tech from Rick, all of the guys are having perfect games. All except Rick himself. Rick starts to realize how his friends who were once supportive now only really care about him for his tech, and they no longer care for his well-being, just whether or not he can keep on making them into super people. At this point, Ted Rick starts to enjoy being Rick, and after living in his home for a while, he starts wearing normal Rick's clothes and even acts like him. When Rick's new friends ask him for more than Rick cares to give them, he's fed up with them and kicks them out, now using both original Rick's portal gun and flask. Then, right before leaving, his quote-unquote friends reveal the way they were acting on Earth was all a ruse, and they take everything they can get their grubby little hands on and leave to go back home. Beth invites Space Beth over and they try and diagnose what's bothering Rick, and they crudely realize he's still Ted and not mentally their dad. Rick teleports away, bringing all of the water in the pool with him, and Space Beth angrily leaves now that she can't swim. We cut to an alien bar where Rick drinks way too much and goes on an adventure of self-discovery, causing chaos all over the cosmos. He finds his way back to Dream Lanes, but in his absence, the lane was demolished and replaced with an L-Mart, which is a reference to the now defunct store Kmart. Rick drunkenly travels across this world looking for any source of happiness, and he makes his way to a cemetery just to see his old boys huddled around it. Rick said he came to pour one out for Margarine, but it turns out also in his absence, one of the boys, little Mike, passed away, his cause of death being a robot arm given to him by Rick. Rick apologizes to them for his involvement in all of this, but Big Mike starts to blame him for what happened, calling him a fake outsider. Using a remote, he freezes the gang, and symbolically, in his last few moments on the planet, he again sees the same deer from the start of the episode, and again, it hops away. Leaving Rick alone and depressed again, he uses his portal gun, but he gets a warning for low portal fluid, which Ted Rick, who's still getting used to real Rick's tech, doesn't understand. So he finds Morty to get some help, ruining the rest of the family's day with random portals. Rick seems to fully accept being real Rick instead of Ted, and he takes all that he had from his vacation planet and throws it in a big shredder, even his picture with Margarine. Morty tries to reason with Rick, but it seems like he fully denounces his vacation life and bullying itself, and wants to put an end to that part of him. In his last action as Ted, Rick appreciates Morty, thanking him for what he does for him, calling him a nice kid. He tells Morty he wants him to have his grandpa, and not the weird thing that Ted Rick has come to be. But this whole time, Morty feels bad about the whole situation, because he knows real Rick isn't much more happy than whatever this version of him is. And after Morty finally convinces Ted to turn back to Rick, he finally hits the big red button that was pushed in his face the whole episode, but pretty anticlimactically, nothing happens. After a few seconds of sitting there, Rick gets up and leaves, but Morty asks him if it worked, but the fact that it did work made him just as sad as discovering his whole life was a lie. I really thought there was going to be more to this episode, maybe another scene with a family in it, but I think ending it so abruptly like that adds to the impact of the episode. In the post-credit scene, Rick is at an alien wedding and he's actually the one getting married. It's a beautiful ceremony until Morty and Summer crash it, and object to his wedding. Rick tries to run away with his new bride, but this time the egg takes him, and Summer and Morty have to explain what happened to this world's people. And boom, that's Rick and Morty Season 9 Episode 2, Rick Days 7 Nights. And I hate to be that guy that glazes everything Rick and Morty, but this episode might be even better than the premiere because honestly I don't like Evil Morty that much, and I personally think that the meaning behind this episode and the repeated theme of Rick trying to run away is so deep and represents the show more than almost any episode we've ever gotten. This episode to me, following Rick as Ted, might be one of the best I've ever seen. Honestly, this is now back-to-back episodes I would put in my top 15 episodes of all time. So Season 9 is off to a great start. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments what you thought of the episode. Subscribe and hype the video, and I'll see you next week for episode 3.